Everybody, welcome to our next episode of Marketeers Clubhouse. I'm Jamie Cale, I'm the host. I've got a very interesting guest today. His name's Joe Prebich. Joe, welcome. I'm going to welcome you before I get too deep. Yeah, I'm happy to have you. Joe has literally a marketing student's wet dream of a resume. If you go look at his LinkedIn, if you're not impressed by what he's done, you're not reading it. I want to start. I just want to highlight it. And we're going to go back through this. Associate editor at Snowboarder Magazine as a very young man. You then went over and helped Redbull change and tweak their sports marketing and ended up being brand manager for Shaun White, which is mind-blowing. You then ended up at Oakley, which is where I met you, and thankfully so. You then went to Zeal Optics as a director of marketing and creative director. There's this like tweak there, which is amazing. I'm going to say it wrong. Fjällräven. How do you actually pronounce it?
Yeah, Fjällräven.
Fjällräven as VP, and a fairly generic VP, which I imagine was more of a go-to-market role than just strictly sales or marketing. It was like an overall go-to-market. You ended up at Mammut as a managing director and CEO of North America, which is amazing. You're growing, like you can literally see you grow up here, which is unbelievable. You end up at a company called iBobs, which is an eyewear company, as VP for sales and marketing. And now you're at one of, truthfully, hilariously, one of my favorite companies, Benchmade, which is a knife company. And I literally, it's not a Benchmade knife, but I'm literally surrounded by a couple different knives on my desk. And my favorite knife by far, which I actually tried to find today, but it's either in my skid steer, one of my tractors, or I dropped it in a field. I will find it again. I've had it for 35 or 34 years ish. It's a CQ C7 Benchmade designed by Emerson. Mm-hmm. It's an original issue. It's been sharpened 1 million times. It's in perfect condition. And it literally is the knife that I carry around with me. And I'm like cutting bale twine, and like, it is unbelievable product. And like literally, yeah,
sure.
like
it's incredible.
Yeah, they're incredible things. Like anyone who doesn't carry like I don't even know what you categorize these, but like a tactical-esque folding knife. If you don't know Benchmade, you're not paying attention. They are the industry standard, in my opinion, for everything, cross-board, brand, killer product, the whole deal. Anyways, that's where you are now. I want to go back. It's funny because when you look through your LinkedIn, you can see you growing through from role to role to role. And I want to just, I want to understand how you did it, the decisions you made, sort of going from piece to piece. You don't get assigned Shaun White just before the 2010 Olympics without having proven everything to that point. So you've done a masterful job with your career. And I like to think that marketing students stumble across our podcast and look at this and go, this is actually a guy's career that I want to look at. So let's go all the way back. And even if you wanted to go back before you get your first sort of start in the industry at Snowboarder. I started out as a 15-year-old kid in a bike shop, well, a 14-year-old kid in a bike shop. Where'd you start? Where'd you come from?
Yeah, that's a great place. And it's honestly a huge part of the foundation of who I am. So thanks for the intro. Awesome to be here. And, it's amazing to hear, a life lived kind of read back to you. And it feels like day one of my first job still today, which is really interesting and kind of a nice validation that you're like, you know what, this was the right path for me. But I didn't know really what that path was until, I started growing up in northern Minnesota, right? So I grew up just south of the Canadian border in a small area called the Iron Range, which is about 3.5 hours north of Minneapolis. It's about an hour south of the Canadian border, near the Boundary Waters, very remote. I live 20 miles outside the nearest town. The nearest town was Eveleth, right, which is about known for hockey and cold weather,
And hunting
and
and fishing, I'm
we're good.
guessing.
We're good at both. Yeah,
Yeah.
hunting and fishing for sure. And that was a huge part of my life, was living, in the outdoors, away from people. Had a younger brother and a golden retriever, and we just played.
Mm.
And as I was becoming a guy, growing up as a kid, I was always entrepreneurial. I was always starting businesses and trying things. And I owned, lawn services, and, sold painted rocks, and always had stuff that I was trying to figure out, like, what am I going to be? And ultimately, like, the thing that clicked for me was, snowboarding became the thing that I felt really connected to. And I think a big part of that was this sense of bigness of the world that I didn't really feel in that small little town, 30 miles from the nearest town, which had nothing really in it for me other than what it was kind of there for the last generations. It's a mining community. It was kind of what you did. You stayed in that community. And that was just not what I wanted. I wanted to go and experience things that were big. And to me, snowboarding was that bigness. It was this really fun, kind of rebellious way I was into punk rock. I was into, trying to figure out who I was, and had a rebellious spirit that I didn't really know how to rebel until I kind of figured out that snowboarding was a really fun expression of that kind of teenage angst. And also a really fun group of people. I didn't really have a super strong knit group of friends at my high school. My friends came through snowboarding, and thank goodness, because I didn't really have that many that were right next to me at home. And I think that made me really desire those connections and experiences, because they weren't there every day. So I'd look forward to those weekends together. And pretty quickly on, I learned that, like, as I got into snowboarding, there was this really cool culture around it that would read Snowboarder Magazine. I'd, just dive right into it. And I was like, these places are incredible. This world is so big. Maybe I can get there some way, somehow, and I could snowboard in these destinations. And as I became, a more advanced snowboarder, I also realized that I was never going to be that good. And, those are, despite my greatest efforts, I really, really wanted to be good. I just kind of knew that I wasn't great at it, but I loved it. I loved it so much. And so I always had a desire to write and to create. And so I had started the high school newspaper, when I was like, I don't know, 14, 15, something like that. And I remember I was in Miss Terrell's class, and, I was writing this thing. I said, hey, if I print them off, I'll give them away. And that was really cool. And I could see, like, I got people to want to do that with me. And we were distributing, the Virginia Voice was what it was called, right? And we did goofy stuff. And then I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool if I, like, started a magazine around snowboarding and action sports, because I loved it way more than I loved, like, the school stuff I was writing about. And I loved the magazines, Snowboarder, Transworld, right? I was like, these were my heroes. So I thought maybe I could try this. So I started a magazine with a couple other buddies from other towns. And I remember the day we were out at my cabin. I was like, we're gonna do it. We're gonna start a magazine. You guys in? They're like, we're in. And Microsoft Publishing, I was making it at home. I was selling ads to, people's parents and local hotels. And my dad took little ads out, and I created the whole thing. And it was a big moment for me, because I found, like, what I was great at. Like, I was really passionate, and I was able to kind of create this really fun community. We threw launch parties for the magazine and had bands, and we were selling these magazines out of our backpacks in school, and it gave us a sense of purpose at the local resort too. We were doing photo shoots and traveling to the Minneapolis area. And I remember that I had done this first issue of the magazine, and I had sent it to Snowboarder, and they had a zine competition at the time, which could have been the catalyst for why, and maybe it was Transworld that had the magazine competition, but it was like there were these local zines that were coming to life. And so I sent mine into the guys at Snowboarder, and I'll never forget the day I was home from school, and my mom answered the phone. The phone rang, and she said, "Hey, Joe, it's for you." And I didn't get a lot of phone calls. And I was like, who is it? And she's like, "It's Pat Bridges."
Mm.
And so Pat, and he was sitting around with Aaron Draplin, and they had gotten a copy of 218. It was a magazine for misguided youth, right?
Mm.
And we had this blood dripping font and all the things we were trying to be from a rebellious side. But I'd like to say that I had quality printing and did our thing. And Pat just did what he does, which was call somebody and reach into somebody's world and
Mm.
ask interesting questions. And he created a connection for me. And I remember that day, he talked about the magazine, and he was like, "This is pretty cool what you're doing." And there was a media militia, media jihad that was written about local areas in the snowboarder zine. And I had wanted to write that, and I'd wanted to be a part of it. And so, we had a decent conversation. It was like speaking to God for me, and I just remember asking him, I said, "Well, how do I get to do what you do?" And he said, "Become a snowboard journalist." And I was just like, okay. So I was taking notes, and I remember, that day I remember making notes. I had a little binder, and I wrote Pat's contact information in like 25 places, under Pat, under Bridges, under snowboarder, under snowboarding, under doing it, just so that I wouldn't lose it. And that connection, I was probably 16 at the time, was critical, 16, 17. And I kept in touch with Pat, and I kept sending him magazines. I would send him magazine issue after issue, same issues, just making sure that he knew I was serious. I'd write him stories, I'd write him updates about contests. And, every once in a while he'd write me back. And there was an opportunity that came up, and he threw me an assignment when I was 17. And he said, "Hey, do you want to write, the local Midwest column for a test?" And I was like, "Oh my God, heck yeah!" So I was like, "I'm in." I drove down to the cities, covered a contest, tried to kind of broaden out beyond my my local scene, and they printed it. And it
Hmm.
was my first check I ever got. I remember, I think it was Prime Media that owned the company at the time, and I was like, "Fucking, I still have it printed and hung up in my bedroom at home." It was my first. It was my first check of the job that I knew I wanted in. And
That's
so
amazing.
I was a full fanboy of snowboarder and Pat, and I wanted anything that I could do. So I interned when I was 18. I interned for him. I came back again a second time. I was there with Ben Fee and Mark McAlera at the time. It was such a fun crew, and these guys helped me to understand what the scene was like. They read me in a way that was both half hazing, half truth. My world of
In the
what it
snowboard
was.
world, that's strange.
100%. I mean, it was. I just remember, coming in, a kid from Nowheresville, Minnesota, to Southern California, and being like, I'm at the place. I made it. I'm at the zone, and coming in like bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. There were so many personalities and so much gruff exterior, and I realized I was like, I got a lot to learn. So I just was like, I'm going to say yes to everything, which meant a lot of road trips with Pat in his Honda up to Mammoth, drinking Red Bulls and hanging out and talking and learning and listening. And so over time, Pat and I developed a relationship where I continued to freelance for him, continued to freelance through high school and then into college. And when I went to school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was on the path of like, maybe I'll be a lawyer. My dad's a lawyer, and it seemed like a great job that he had. And that was kind of a path that I had considered until I met Pat and started creating words around snowboarding that I loved. So I went to journalism school in Missoula. So I picked a school that I could go to the mountains, that was known for writing and magazines, and went and just threw myself into it. And throughout my time at the University of Montana in Missoula, I continued to write for Snowboarder. I got a freelance job working for ESPN. I was a runner during the X Games, and did everything that I could possibly do to be a part of this industry. And I remember I had never really gotten a job. Every once in a while, I was like getting a freelance bite here or there. And I was getting ready to graduate, and there was a super park coming up, and it was up in Lake Louise. And it coincided with finals for my last semester. And, I was going to have to miss my finals. Some wouldn't let me take it early, some did. And I remember having a conversation with one of my professors, and he was not going to let me take this early. I said, "Listen, I'm going. I got the job that I want, and it's writing, and it's going to, do this cool article and work with Snowboarder. And I said, I'm going whether I get to take the final earlier or not. So help me make this work, because I've been here doing my thing. And I convinced them to let me do it. And then boom, I remember uh, this woman, Brody, who worked at Snowboarder, she picked me up when I flew into Calgary, and I was like, I'm there. It was my first like trip, and it was being fully read in, working all night, partying all night, working all day, and it was just everything I could have ever imagined. And I didn't end up getting a job after that, but I got an opportunity to experience Super Park, experience what it was like to be, in the scene with my heroes around me. And I was like, I was committed. So I ended up moving to Idaho after school, continuing to freelance and string as best I could, and lived in a single wide trailer in the middle of the woods right at Tamarack Resort, which had just opened. They were one of the first new resorts in America. They had all this stuff going on. It was an amazing winter. And I was still getting a little bit of pressure to go and, become a lawyer. Right? So I took my LSATs, and it seemed like maybe a reasonable backup plan, because I didn't have anything yet, but I wasn't done yet. And one day I just, had an awesome powder day with some buddies. We were at snowmobiling, and I was just like, you know what? I think I'm just done with this law thing. I need to just commit to writing, commit to being a part of this thing. And that commitment, I think, got me over the hurdle mentally to be more bold with what I wanted and try to convince the team at Snowboarder that I could be a value partner. And that May, I ended up getting an offer to join the team, which was so cool. And so I moved from, middle of nowhere's Idaho to Southern California, and ate turkey sandwiches and cut my teeth in a way that helped me understand who I was going to become foundationally. But kind of working back to the marketing side, a huge part of the thing that makes me me in a brand role is the ability to tell a story and to be connected to storytelling, and to listen to a brand's problems or a product's opportunity, and create a narrative that helps to connect your customer or your audience to this overwhelmingly cool experience. So it was really fun to know so much of who I am today was anchored in that kid, that 15, 16-year-old kid. I still feel like him, still get motivated, different things, like different priorities. But so that's a bit of the background of kind of what got me going and what got me into the industry before any resume building started. A lot of that foundation purpose building started.
Does your brand need some help in the trade marketing department? Manage your sales tools with Regulator's easy-to-use features. Whether it's fixtures or displays, POP, custom art or promo products, you can submit single or bulk orders for all your locations within minutes, using a simple, streamlined process. Deliver content, manage your budget and view the market, all from the palm of your hand. Move up to 10 times faster than your competitors and capture all the opportunities that put your brand on top. Visit brandregulator.com for more information.
So I got two questions. Do you have, I'm going to guarantee you do, within arm's reach somewhere, do you have your first zine somewhere?
Oh, I don't. I'm at the office today. I don't have it within arm's reach. Yeah.
So
I don't have it with me.
Just as a little weird background, our paths are so ridiculously close. How I didn't meet you sooner blows me away. So back a million years ago, right about the time you did, a friend of mine, Jamie Cormack, and Jamie and his brother are the founders and managing directors of Herschel, the bag company. Mm-hmm. And Jamie and Lyndon are two of my best friends on the planet. They grew up in Calgary. I was a cyclist, but I was a cyclist in the snowboard world. So I was very good friends with Ken Achenbach. I helped start Derek Height's career. I've been amazing like John Boyer, who's one of the original OG Barfoot pros, is one of my best friends. And he's a screenwriter in Hollywood. He's got a new movie coming up. Fingers crossed, it's going to be epic. But your Super Park adventure, I was there. I was there, and I had you and I are right there. Strangely enough, Jamie Cormack founded way back then a local zine called Sequence, which I joined in on. And so I was also a partner in a local zine, which I have in my credenza just behind or just in front of me. Like we were running the exact same path, minus the fact that I'm too dopey to take the LSATs and I can't spell to save my life, which I openly admit. But my creativity comes out in different spaces. So how you and I didn't meet until Oakley literally blows my mind, because we were, I guarantee you, we were at probably 5 or 6 of the same parties at any given period in that time, and just walked past each other with an unknowing glance. Like,
totally.
This is crazy. Okay. So you're setting the stage, and your growth in that period is shocking. Again, I'm not trying to hijack your story. It's identical to mine. All my knowledge comes from the fact that I'd run 20 little businesses as a kid. I did some writing for Transworld, organized some photo shoots with Gallup. You know, I unlike you, I had actually some very clean access through Ken Achenbach to like high levels of like proper photography and stuff. So I was like trying to get free cat trips to Island Lake and I invited Lyndon Cormack and Derek Height, and like, they're just friends of mine. I just wanted free cat trips. And I was like, I'm going to write a story. Of course I'm going to write a story. Everyone's writing stories. Why the hell can't I? And this was while you were a very young man still, because I'm a little bit older than you, but all of my brand centric knowledge is rooted in all the things that I didn't know then that I stumbled across as I went through this cycle. So you rolled through this shockingly similar cycle. How do you end up at Redbull?
Yeah, it was one of the more interesting lessons that I learned. So I had just, gotten essentially my dream job. Thinking about my 16-year-old self working at Snowboarder, that was the goal, right? Mm-hmm. Mission accomplished. I am here. Mm-hmm. And I had gotten out and, I was doing articles and living that life. And I loved it. It was fantastic. And one day, Pat and I, we would go to lunch with the team and we were chatting, and he brought this up to me. He said, hey, I think that you should consider this job that Red Bull's got. And he knew Adam Moran from the Burton side, and Adam was slotted to kind of be the Burton side of traveling with Shaun, and had spent a bunch of time with him prior. And the transition of Red Bull signing Shaun from Mountain Dew was that catalyst for the role. And Pat knew this gentleman, Josh Kendrick, who was hiring for the job. And he and Josh had, spent some time together apparently. And Josh had mentioned that he was looking for somebody, and Pat said, hey, I think you should consider this. And I said, well, why would I consider that? Like, that was ridiculous. Like, I'm a journalist, man. Like, Gonzo, let's go. Like, I'm here. This is my dream. I want to be the Jack Kerouac. I want to be the Hemingway of, snowboarding. He's like, well, what job do you want? I was like, I want your job. He's like, well, that's my job. That's my job. Like, it was very clear. Pat was built to be the editor. And it was one of the most direct ways for him to say, I don't know if I was a good or bad fit at Snowboarder, but I think he saw that I wasn't a long fit for Snowboarder, and that I maybe had different things that I could do. And so Pat really encouraged me to apply for this role, which I thought was both strange in the time where I was like, am I getting kicked out? Maybe. Or is it really somebody saw something that he thought I would be a good partner for Shaun, which I really believe that's the case, where I think my personality, who I was, the type of person I was a good fit for Shaun at the point in time he was at. So Pat, I think, did me a really strong solid of helping me identify that maybe my future was better on the brand side. And it did take me a bit to understand that change, because I went from the kind of omni-channel brand agnostic to like, what would it be like to really drive a story home at one brand.
Hyper focused. Yeah.
And I knew kind of I had to, if I chose that role, I was going to be there for a long time, because I wasn't going back to journalism after coming from the brand side. So I made that choice and went after the job wholeheartedly, and lucky for me, got it. And I had a great blend of, kind of both digital background from kind of the early e-com blogosphere, building that digital content to be able to help manage a lot of what Redbull owned with Shaun was all of his assets, all of his channels of distribution. We owned his website, we owned his social media, we did this insane deal where we owned literally every piece of content that we filmed of him. So the ability for us to be able to create content and distribute it via an owned platform and brand it via the athlete was like really new. And so I viewed it as a distribution play, right? It was content that we could distribute. So we had our own media company, and let's operate it that way. Let's come up with cool concepts and let's go. And so I came into the Red Bull world at a really, what I felt was a special time with some really special people who were extraordinarily creative and backed big ideas still in really cool ways. Steve Nielsen, Sticks, just an awesome guy who, was a great partner in kind of talking through what did the field need. He also helped really develop a lot of the kind of placements into some of those Rocky Mountain territories of like, where could we build big ideas, which was amazing. Amy Taylor was, a very strong advocate of bold ideas and unique personalities. And kind of Red Bull had this energy and this spirit that was still rebellious, grown up, but wanted to continue to push its roots while I was still there. And I got great access to really interesting people to bounce ideas off. And it was the most type A environment. And I also knew that I loved that. Like it felt like eat or be eaten. And if we eat you, we digest every part of you. There's nothing left. Like you're gone. Yeah. And so the partners that were there were, work all day, party all night people. And they worked really, really, really hard. And so I learned early on that you could do both, that you could, really burn hard and be productive and enjoy it. And it set the tone for what I think I've always looked for, which is an extraordinarily type A environment, high growth drive. I really love businesses and brands that are looking to ask for the most of both their customers and their employees. So the Red Bull time was just, really fun.
And for people who don't know, Red Bull's an energy drink company, and one of the big ones. Two, Shaun is Shaun White. He's got red hair, pretty good at snowboarding. The time period that you're in is like that 2007 to 2010 sort of sphere. And for people that don't know, Red Bull was not always the Red Bull that we see today. Although I'm going to say actually their strongest point in time is probably in that period through to maybe 2015, where being a Red Bull athlete was like being knighted. It's a completely different thing. And now there are 1,000 mountain bikers with Red Bull helmets. They're like, it's a thing. Like if you could get a Red Bull hat, which, like I've got a crashed ice hat behind me. Like this was a thing. If you could like, back in 2007, if you could get this hat, you were something. In fact, like it was like, you would be like every little kid on
the thing,
literally the thing. And now I got one, and it's like, it holds a lot less value. Yeah. And so the ability to get in and sculpt what they were doing at the time, because you were working with their number one, maybe there was an F1 guy or something economically, maybe at a different sphere, but Shaun being like in North America for big investment. Yeah, he was the investment. The amount of weight dropped on a guy who's never been in the branded world's hands is incredible. Like that is shocking. That one they had to do that.
It is kind of shocking.
Dude, it's shocking. Like there would have been a lineup from LA to Calgary for that job. Straight people just stacked. If it was an open, like anyone could apply, the lineup would have been insane.
Yeah. It was really interesting time too where it was shocking, but also like I don't think anybody really knew what it could be, and it only became something because I would say it was somewhat undefined, right?
Mm.
So it was like, hey, we have this asset, like what do we do? Like, hey, we put it all in the contract. The lawyers did all their stuff. Like, we think we could do stuff, but Red Bull had the opportunity, but didn't necessarily have yet the plan. And I think they needed the person. And one of the big challenges with onboarding a new individual as a personality is that they there are contracted dates, and then there's the relationship, right? And it's like if you could build the relationship, then you might be able to do more with the story. And it's like, well, could we be valuable to Shaun outside of a sticker on his helmet? And that's
Totally.
how I viewed it. Was like, what could we do that no other brand could ever do? And I really did think about it that way. And my approach was, both Shaun and Red Bull were somewhat outsiders to that
Mm-hmm.
space, right? They were not the core. And I never felt the core, right? I was never really in the core. I always felt like I enjoyed competition. I enjoyed winning. I enjoyed those elements of business that didn't necessarily come through in snowboarding, but this was an opportunity with somebody who also liked to win. And so competition based, stuff was like, how do we succeed? How do we do the thing that, will put this athlete in a place to be the most successful and the brand to have the most exposure? And I think that's where, Red Bull gave me the opportunity to bring really bold and creative ideas. And then they actually like put millions of dollars behind it. Like there are two, I think, very formative moments during that time where one, was this period of time where we were trying to figure out like what to do as we had kind of done the initial onboarding with Shaun, and like we went on a great trip and we told cool stories, went to Japan. And as we got to know each other as a crew, we had a down day in Niseko, and it was dumping, and obviously maybe a big night the night before, just kind of taking a slow day. And I had asked him, I said, what's the hardest part about being you?
Mm.
And he's like, oh man, he's like, I can't get hurt ever. He's like, look at my schedule, Joe. He's like, I can never have a down day. I can't learn anything new because if I get hurt, I'm off, and then I can't do the thing. And he's like, I got all these tricks in my head, and I just don't know. I don't know how to learn them because I can't get hurt. I can't afford to get hurt.
Mm.
Cool. We go off. We shred some pow. We have some fun. But this idea sticks with me. This idea of like I can't do the thing that's in my head, but I knew there would be a way to do it. And one day, Shaun and I were working, right? We were goofing around and we were surfing and just spending time together. And I paddled out to him. And I say, hey, man, if I could make you a foam pit where you could learn all those tricks, would you give me some extra days? Because we had like contracted days, where we could do stuff. He's like, if you could do that, he's like, I'll give you my whole season. I literally paddled in, drove up to Santa Monica, wrote the business plan. Boom, here's what I want to do this thing. I chatted with Dave Mateus, who incredible events manager. Dude's incredible. He helped me understand how to put together this kind of proposal to pitch. And, I was a long-haired, still somewhat rebellious, fun dude. So I have hair down to here, was living that lifestyle still. And I remember I went through the business planning process and had to pitch, our CEO and Amy Taylor, all these people on this multi-million-dollar business plan. And it was in this glass conference room. And it was like the biggest presentation of my life. And I had flown in the night before from Vegas because Shaun and I, we were in Vegas often during that period of time. And I flew in early, got in, looked like shit, delivered, I think, a really good presentation, but no doubt it wasn't something that most businesses would probably say, yeah, here's $3 million, like go. But Red Bull had the culture that I think allowed them to take some risks on really interesting ideas. And I think they thought, well, if this kid can do it, let's see. And lo and behold, that started a whole journey mentally through both ups and downs where this idea was amazing and we knew it had staying power. It ended up transforming both a large portion of what kind of how athletes, train today. Our foam pit, was the first of its kind, and it then evolved into airbags and all the other things. But the idea we came up with was like fill a pit with foam and jump into it.
Yeah.
And we pioneered that whole place, and we obviously had to do it in a very Red Bull way. So, we put it in the backcountry in an insane destination, kept it totally top secret. And, up until, that period of time, the idea itself was just an idea. Nobody knew if it was going to be worth anything, and they had spent a lot of money, and it became one of the more difficult points in my career because that was right around 2008, 2009. So the economy had obviously imploded. People were losing jobs. There's a housing crisis. What to do? Money's tight. Budgets. And I remember I had effectively spent the $3 million prior to any tricks being learned or things being done. There's a million podcasts on just how we did that whole piece. But I remember one of my bosses at Red Bull, he kept calling looking for an update, and I kept not answering the phone. So he sent somebody out there to check on me, and they're like, go see what Joe's doing. And all he's doing is spending money. We have no updates. And I'll never forget the two guys came out, and Dave Mateus was one of them. And he's like, this is insane. He literally calls. He's like, I'm staying. This project's the one. So we adopted him, and we built this amazing tribe of people who were like, we've really got something special here. And when we closed kind of all of this stuff, it was still really unknown whether or not this whole thing was going to work and it was going to be worth the payoff. And I got back, and I went from like a kid who people were willing to bet on to like the guy who spent all the money, or a lot of money, and there were no results yet. And so I remember I got banished by my director, not Josh Kendrick, in the business. And he essentially, when I came home from about 110 days straight on the road, he was like, you're in big trouble. I've never been yelled at like I've been yelled at by this person. And he's like, you're in deep shit. And he's like, you won't be working here. And I remember the tail between my legs because I didn't know if we had gotten it. I didn't know if Shaun was going to win. I knew that we had done something special, but, we hadn't cut the films. We hadn't seen anything. We hadn't done any of the work yet. So it was this trust moment during the summer leading up to the next qualification in the Olympics ultimately. And I thought I was going to get fired because I'd overspent the budget. There was nothing to prove. And I knew I was going to get fired, or I thought I knew, when they essentially transitioned me and said, by the way, like, sure, you're managing snow stuff, that's fine, but like, we need you to manage the parkour guys. And that's not a dig on the parkour guys, but like, I remember I got flown out to a trip, and I was like, this is it. Like, I lost it. I lost my chance. But I did something with the guys in the media house before, and Scotty Bradfield was an awesome advocate of me and creative projects. And he'd been there a long time. I don't know if you know Scotty at all, but exceptional gentleman. He ran kind of the media house operations for Red Bull North America, and he took some great bets on great stories being told. And I had effectively been cut off, couldn't spend any money. They wouldn't let me do anything. And I remember we were cutting this trailer, and we were trying to use a bunch of free music, and it sounded horrible. And come up with this really cool edit, and we used, I think it was like the Requiem for a Dream soundtrack, like this big, heavy, orchestral like overture for the teaser. And I was like, that's it. Like, let's do it. I went into Scotty's office, and Claude Merkel was the producer on it, and we were like, we need $5,000 for this song, and it'll work. Like, you do it, sign it. And he's like, I got you guys. Like, don't worry about it. Just get the teaser done and drop it. And, we did that, and then the teaser dropped, and it was the first video to do over 1 million views for Red Bull North America. It hit like nobody's business. It exploded. And I knew from that moment that it was going to change. And I went from pretty much hiding under the desk to being asked to open up one of our sales meetings for the team in the theater to premiere the trailer. And it became something that people obviously like bet on and then rode the coattails on, which was awesome. And that was the goal, right? We did limited edition cans. We did in-game, partnerships with Target and Ubisoft and all this stuff. It went, but there was like a bajillion times where it was going to fail. And I remember a moment where we were on the ground, and I was young, right? 22 at the time, 22, 23. And I had just spent a ton of money, most of the budget, and it had snowed, created an avalanche. The half pipe was covered up. Filming was supposed to happen. The whole thing was going to fail. And I was just kind of having a mental breakdown. I was laying on the ground in this house, and I had just kind of given everything what I thought was to this project. And this guy, Shaun White, who is a freelance filmer, he shot most of the work that I've done during that time. And he's an awesome dude, great friend. And he walked in, he's like, man, don't worry. He's like, we'll do it. And he just gave me his hand, picked me up and said, let's just get back out and we'll jump on a sled and we'll go do what we can. And it was really cool to see how close knit each creative partner was to the overall project. And I think that's what I found so inspiring about being a marketer, is that you really do you can bring the best people together who will help you as a business succeed if you find those right people who have that same desire. So I've always gravitated towards a pretty tight-knit crew of people who really want to tell great story, who are willing to go the distance, who have that empathy towards the creative process, to risk and failure. And I think that was a really critical kind of juncture for me, being able to then use that vehicle, which was the Redbull time, my time with Shaun, the projects, those ideas, to go and try some business stuff, and that gave me that foundation to feel more confident.
From brand development to simple market executions, 54 Blue helps brands of all sizes grow with sustainability in mind. Their full stack range of services include print, fabrication, design, web, interactive, content marketing, brand consulting, creative strategy, and more. Join some of the world's largest brands and lean on 54 Blue for your next go-to-market. Visit 54blue.com for more information.
It's interesting. You set the stage at Red Bull for Felix going into a balloon and going into space. And so everybody that has done something absolutely stupid at Red Bull that ends up working owes you a debt. So I hope they send you a bottle of champagne after every dumb thing that they spend many, many millions of dollars on. The interesting thing is it was a bit of a loaded question, or not even a question, but it's a loaded statement when I said, it was a massive risk for Red Bull to take a gamble on you. And I say that at the time tongue in cheek, because the reality is, and for young listeners out there that want to be a sports marketing person, people would kill for that job, literally someone would murder someone to do that. But what most people don't get is the level of authenticity that you need to be able to actually do it. You can't be, you need to recognize that Shaun is an important person and that he's got this economic value, but you have to go in and treat him with authenticity. You have to be so authentic. You have to be able to understand that he can't walk out in public and not get recognized, and that there's issues with that. You can't bring that back and continue it. You need to understand that he's just a dude. Yeah, he's a super athlete, but what Red Bull does really well is these are humans. They're humans before they're athletes. And most people lose real track of that. And unless you're in the sports entertainment business, which is effectively what sports marketing and any sport where you're getting paid money, you're an entertainer. Shaun White's an entertainer. He's a snowboarder, but he's an entertainer. Unless people realize that, that's the breakdown. First breakdown. They're entertainers. They have to be really good. Their craft isn't singing. It isn't acting. It isn't signing business deals. It's flying around on a snowboard, but yet it still needs to be treated as seriously as it is. And of course, the outside veneer of this is hanging in Vegas, going to amazing shows, girls all around. This is the lifestyle component of this is insane. but it's not really what it is. It goes
Absolutely.
it goes so much past that. Most of these things are done not at Nobu. These deals, they're not cut there. They're cut in the brake. They're cut in on the chairlift. In that,
all that other stuff was just the noise around the lifestyle. But then that core that you talk about, and also for when we're thinking about like what does it take, you think about like from a marketing perspective, you had to figure out like what to do. Like you couldn't just have the job. Like that job wasn't just a job. It was like you could do it as a job and do the deal and make sure he had a can in his hand. But how lame is that? Right? Like
that's
the way to kind of break through, and this is what I've pushed for a lot of different businesses and also people who work with me is like, let's go have some big ideas. Like, let's go really have some big ideas. Like, let's push the envelope. Let's understand what is the way to push the envelope to transform and to change. And I think one of the things that I am very comfortable with and have had to become is that like when you push the envelope, you sometimes break it or you fail at it. And it's just such once that crack reforms, you're a lot stronger and you understand where it broke the first time so that you don't break it the next time. And you can kind of keep working your risk tolerance up the kind of marketing and brand bet. Because ultimately, it's really challenging to be a marketer because you spend the money, but you also know that it will drive revenue and brand awareness and all those things will happen. But you're the first one through the door. Right? You're the first one through the door, and you have to be confident in your plan or your idea and that it's anchored in something other than, like you said, the kind of noise around the edges.
Yeah. And there's like, I don't know, maybe I'm frustrated with wokeism and a few other things going on right now, but I'm seeing like beer company after beer company failing, trying to pretend to be something that they're not. And I look at it and I'm just like, you can smell it a million miles away. There was someone who made an executive decision to do something that doesn't relate to the brand. It might work for some of their consumers, but it's not who they are. And they're trying to drive these weird agendas. And you'll find brands do this. But soon as you deviate from authenticity, you're screwed. It doesn't matter. It might be successful once. These things can happen. They do. However, it's not a repeatable thing. It morphs the brand into something that is a Frankenstein version of what it should be, and its core consumers are gone.
Totally. And I think one of the things that's interesting with that statement, like on authenticity, my world was like, I've had to view authenticity through the lens of Redbull, Shaun competition versus the lens of authenticity to maybe the core as I had known the snowboard industry. Right. So that was an interesting push and pull around what is authentic, right? Was it authentic to create something that put a competitive advantage so distinctly in one person's court? Well, yes, if I were kind of doing my job and pushing Redbull forward, but if I were to look at it from, maybe some of the industry perspective, there was this true, anger around what that also created, the sense of, well, that's a crazy competitive advantage for one person versus the other. So it was interesting for me as a person to try to kind of go back and forth between like, was I authentic to my mission in the brand? Yes. Was I maybe inauthentic to kind of general feel of the industry? Potentially, yes, too. Creating that competitive culture. And it is always hard to figure out what your true north is. But if you can do enough work, then you can be honest with yourself. Like, okay, I'm good with where we end up, no matter who likes or doesn't like it.
Yeah, and authenticity, one, is a sliding scale, and it's highly perspective based. Coming from where you were as a journalist at Snowboarder, Shaun wasn't authentic already. He just wasn't. In the eyes of every core snowboarder, Shaun had already passed that. He was like on the way to either being a target athlete or he wasn't there. Although I am going to guarantee when you got to know Shaun correctly, you found out that he's probably, and I don't know him, but I'm assuming he's hyper authentic to to a point that is laughable, that if you looked back to your old consideration of what he was, you probably look back and go, I had it wrong.
Yeah.
And
And I mean, he was great. And I thought Pat always did a good job of putting Shaun's competitive nature in context, and I think there was an Olympic issue where they did a profile on him, and, Pat got Shaun in words, I got Shaun in actions with him, and being able to find that we could be an industry that, has multiple camps, and I think that that's great. And it was just, it was trailblazing in a cool way, to try to consider where we ended up, and we were all kind of growing through it. Like you said in the beginning, it's like, wow, we were really just growing up in all of this stuff too, which was pretty cool to understand, who do we really want to be? Who does he want to be? So yeah, it was such a fun time to be a part of, that transformation within an industry.
Yeah, amazing. So you have a stint, and we won't dwell on Oakley. We've talked about Oakley a million times on my podcast, because I've had Scott Bowers, who you would have worked for, Brian Takumi, and a few other people. Great guys, amazing brand. The core of what Oakley was, and with Takumi there is. And I say that, and somewhere there's a bunch of people cringing because Luxottica, which is a behemoth, owns it. But I stand by that. Oakley's heart and soul still exists in a guy named Brian Takumi, and thankfully so. But so you had a stint there, and you were sports marketing, doing a similar-esque job in that position. But then it kind of changes. You move into a business standpoint, and this is where it's interesting to me, because the trading authenticity in a boardroom at like C-suite level meetings is a different thing, where it's like, sales and authenticity aren't growing. They're not exactly in parallel. They're just not. They should be, if you consider everything from the root of brand, which is how I consider everything. They should be going up at the exact same time. That is not the reality in a lot of companies. And you would know this already, that sales and numbers bend authenticity to what it needs to be to suit growth. And that becomes an Achilles heel for a lot of brands. And it becomes veneerish, which I find, like, dude, there's like, you don't have to go far. I've said it before. Just look at the surf industry and the disaster that happened there. They were propping up sales, hiding inventory, still buying beach houses to hold athletes in. Like, it was just like, it was so broken because authenticity got trumped by year over year number. And so now you've transitioned as an expert in putting authenticity forward for the brand to lever, to then being the guy who levers that.
And that's really well said. What's interesting, the catalyst for that career shift was one that was like, it was more like an aha moment. I was chatting with somebody at Oakley, and I'd come to kind of do the same thing at Redbull did for Oakley, right? Expand the relationship and do all that stuff. And this person, not right or wrong, just speaking their truth, was like, hey man, like, you're only getting to do what you do because you're next to him. Like, you're next to Shaun, he's famous, therefore you are kind of riding his coattails. And we were having this conversation. It was a little heated. I didn't defend it. I was just like, I guess I can't defend it, because Shaun is like a global superstar. Maybe I am, only drafting off of those things. Maybe I didn't contribute at the level that I had thought. So I do a little self-reflection, and I go, you know what? Probably run my time next to this person. Can I do it myself? Can I do it without him? Can I prove this person wrong? Can I go and be distant from this individual who was a catalyst for much of the opportunity, but was he the sole driver? And I needed to know for myself. So that was what made me make the choice to change careers. And Zeal was a startup. So Maui Jim had just purchased Zeal Optics, which was this terrible brand. And I remember somebody asked me, they're like, why would you go to Zeal Optics after like what a terrible brand? And I was like, isn't it? Worst brand I'd ever seen. And I was like, if I can change this thing into something cool, then that'll be my calling card.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really wanted something to prove to myself that I had the chops to be able to do it. And I remember I showed up, I had a laptop and a logo, and they were like, do your thing, like build your thing. And there was a realization that you were no longer at a cool company, right? You were at a business that nobody knew about, that was owned by a very cool company, but that doesn't make Zeal cool, right? It was like, how do you go and build this thing? So I learned a lot about product development, marketing, sales teams, building stuff. What is it going to take? How scrappy you need to be with your dollars. I used to fly business class, and it was like, oh my God, we're definitely driving. Like you got so comfy at these big companies that scrappy startup felt it felt like a jarring shake, but a really positive move. And again, more authentic to myself. Like, can I build? And that became, an incredibly cool part of what I learned about being a marketer. Got me into those boardroom conversations. I learned how to turn dollars around based on plans, not on projects, right? So like I opened up the wallet at Redbull based on a cool idea that didn't have to sell stuff, but it sold a lot of stuff. Zeal, and then my kind of future was really based on how do I make sure that these things drive sales and controlling more directly that. And I kind of always react to kind of the traditional way. And I think it's kind of changing, but the traditional way, many board level conversations go around marketing, which is like, make the pictures pretty, and in reality, I think there's a whole new respect for how brand represents the visual identity of the thing, the way that the product is communicated to the consumer, the loyalty that's there. And so I think over the last decade, there's been this huge shift in realization that sales is a byproduct of a really strong story and a really strong connection to the customer. And ultimately, you have to have great sales leadership to be able to succeed, sure. But without the brand, the best sales leadership in the world is not going to succeed. Without that guidance that can help those products connect to the right customers, you probably won't gain the traction that you could or should in the market. So I learned a ton around how different people viewed what was my craft, right? From a CFO who didn't give two shits around creative to a president who loves it, right? And he's like, I want to just tell story, to somebody who loves product. It's like, okay, if brand is the kind of in between of all of these connecting points, how do we, positively bring the best and elevate that story to the customer? And I think that's helped me because I've had really fun dynamic roles in many different departments from digital to customer service to product development to engineering, sales, like all of it snaps together to like, what do we do? And I think that's where that kind of go-to-market function of brand, helping everybody get in line, being the first out the door, is an important thing for, leaders in marketing to realize that is our job. Our job is to make sure that we're in the front, waving the flag, staking the claim, proving that we're there with you, and everybody else department is going to go do their thing if they feel that common purpose and mission.
We're not here for the high rollers, snooty wine critics, or long-haul collectors, but we do think it's about time wine cellars turned into swoon-worthy works of art. Our experienced designers will bring your dream wine cellar to life, fitting any sized space and aesthetic requirements in your home. Our craftsmen carefully hand-build your cellar to give you a wine storage space that really feels like you. Visit themoderncellar.com for more information.
So it's interesting because you and I are in an alignment that I don't believe we knew we were. I wrote an article for Entrepreneur Magazine not long ago where my analogy, and I thankfully have amazing people. I ran this by Pierre Martin, who's an amazing brand guy. I ran it through Bows, and Scott is like an idol to me. But basically, I look at brand and how go-to-market works like a bullwhip. So in the center of a whip, you got this big, massive handle, and then you got this core that runs all the way through, and then you have all this braiding that intertwines all the way around. And I'll put a link to this article in the notes. But in the end, brand sits at the core of everything. You need a good brand steward holding the whip. And as the whip gets cracked in the correct direction, things amplify and everything speeds up as it goes down. And the strands of the brand are the functional groups. They're all the different, their product, their finance, they're all the different functional groups of marketing, digital, event, brick and mortar, trade marketing, all of those. And they all have to support and they all intertwine. And if brands continue to have massive silos, that never happens. You end up with these super dysfunctional go-to-markets where things break. And then at the end of this, and I find this amazing. I'm a whip guy. I love knives and whips. Indiana Jones. I'm endlessly amazed. There's a sonic boom. By the way, the whip is the very first structure known to man to break the sound barrier. At the end, that crack is a sonic boom. And then it took humans about 2,000 years to do it mechanically, to do it with jet engines and these things, or guns, weapons, to be able to break the sound barrier. So, and then you get back all these echoes from the market. You hear it back, and you need to listen to all these echoes of what's coming back to be able to go through your go-to-market cycle again. And this is really a thing. And brand being at the core, I've got one of the reasons I started writing this, one of my very, very good friends is the CMO of this company called Authentic Brands Group. And they go around and they buy brands that have or are in distress. That is their direct purpose. So they, in fact, by the way, own the surf industry now. They just finished buying Board Riders. They already own Volcom, which means they own Volcom, Billabong, Quicksilver, Roxy, and whatever the other small brands. They literally own the surf industry because it imploded, and they could go in and take it over and then start bringing it back. And, brands never die. And the reason I started looking at this is the value that exists in brand, the name Billabong, the name Quicksilver, whatever it may be. That's where the value is. It's not on any given product. It's not on any given year, although the year's worth of sales is exceedingly important, but the value is the name, owning the brand identity. And that's where all of the market equity is stored, is right at brand. And it needs to be cherished, and it needs to be evolved, and it needs to be loved. And it's an organism all unto its own that needs care in the marketplace. And to me, that's like, when I, again, going through your list of things, you're staging these. You might come in and something needs correction or to be set on the right path, but what you're doing is setting it on the right path, not for any given product, but for the brand. And that's a real different mentality. It's like, there are exceptions. iPhone, fairly big exception, redefined a company that was maybe struggling a tiny bit in the background. However, that is also it. Fundamentally, iPhone just fed the brand. Like it just became Apple. And so for young marketers out there, always think about brand. If you don't think about brand at the core of every decision you're making, you are fucking up.
Yeah. And like brand is not, it's not advertising, right? Brand is not advertising. Brand is how you act. And it's how you act as a leader of people and departments and consider challenges. It's what you listen to. And I think oftentimes brand gets used as like, it's true. The core is in how the consumer views the logo, but the net effect of whether that love of the customer is full or empty in the tank of the logo 100%. Comes down to the actions every single day that we take. And I think it's almost surprising how few marketing leaders actually view brand as their responsibility outside of kind of the basics. I'm a dig deep kind of guy. Like I like to be in the details to make sure that we know what's happening with the brand as best we can. And I think it's really interesting to see many different structures of how businesses operate, but I found it exceedingly rare where there are those marketing leaders really truly connected to what they're trying to do versus what their quote unquote teams are doing, and the bigness that's operated around it. And I think that the customer requires, like you said, a lot of love and a lot of awareness that we hear them, and a lot of in-market time. And brand is it's almost like an executive coach, or a therapist. It's there to listen to the customer's problems and then to adapt solutions over time together without losing its own way. And I found it highly beneficial to consider that style of an approach, because it helps me in times of stress when sales are low. It's like, what are the actions or reactions? It's like, hold on. Let's have a real conversation at the brand level. What are the impacts? What are we trying to cause? What's the effect? How do we want to do this? There's no silver bullet to fixing a problem. Most often, there's a lot of, can we get everybody from the go-to-market process aligned behind what we think the solution is? And if yes, then most likely we'll succeed. If no, then we'll probably fracture and we won't succeed. So, connecting those basic elements is, I think, as critical as the world's greatest creative element,
Right.
or greatest sales strategy.
Creative's an interesting thing. When I sat down with Takumi at Oakley, Brian is the creative guy. He feeds the brand through the love and care from a creative direction. There's so many ways to navigate and get there, but in the end, not focusing on anything other than brand health as an organization, as your number one KPI. What's our brand health? And what's our appearance like in the market? That makes a brand bulletproof. Could Oakley, any other company other than Nike and Oakley, waded through the waters of fucking Lance's issues? And I know Lance, I like Lance enough, and it's not me dogging on Lance. These companies were getting dragged down to the bottom of the ocean by association. And could they have done that without real insane brand health? My guess is they would have had a huge problem. If that was Zeal Optics would have disappeared off this planet at that point.
100%.
Even Maui Jim at that time, which was reasonably strong. No chance they would have been done, because of, they just don't hold the brand equity in the overall marketplace. The brand doesn't hold that health. And so I think that it's in everyone's best interest to grow the brand health. And to be honest, net long term, it's the only thing worth value.
Yeah. And it's how businesses are being bought and sold now. Yeah. It's like, sure, you have to have a healthy P&L, but if you have an incredible customer file and you have incredible customer engagement, it's an opportunity to monetize, that at greater profitability. And I think that's being realized by financing, right? More so than ever, that brands are not just pretty pictures. They're customers who are willing to spend more for things they love, and they'll spend more over time. So I think that's been a really nice shift in how the finance arm and the cash side of any business is starting to respect, and there's mutual respect there, because I think marketing and brand has always had to respect finance, because we need the vehicle of cash to be able to go and talk to the customers at some level. So I think that partnership has gotten a lot more unique, a lot more fun, a lot more less contentious than it was in the past. So there's mutually assured profitability if we can all work together, and ultimately, we can win if the customer wins, which I think is a super cool moment.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
I think this is a really cool transition. You've worked all the way through some amazing brands. Where you are now, you're VP of marketing at Benchmade. You're in a different, and for most people, they would struggle going from, sugary rocket water that you pour down your throat and mix with vodka sometimes to knives, through a whole bunch of other companies. Not to say that product is product, but the reason you've been able to do that is because of your awareness of brand. And so now you're at Benchmade. Explain a little bit about what Benchmade is to you now, your opportunities at Benchmade, things that you can bring from Redbull, Oakley, launching Fjällräven basically into North America, which, by the way, great success, I think. from what I've seen, the brand awareness is amazing. So that's you. And I spoke to you when you were doing that a couple times, and it's like, my head was exploding. I was like, that's amazing. Like, I was very aware of the brand, but obviously it just didn't really exist in our territories. So landing at Benchmade, to me, sooner or later, you're going to be a CGO, Chief Growth Officer, which umbrellas, for people that don't know, sort of umbrellas over sales and marketing, and holds the handle of the whip in go-to-market, so that brand is taken care of, net goals of finance are taken care of, but you get to then bridge when marketing is being a dick to sales, or sales is being a dick to marketing, which, shocking, it's a thing that exists out there. You get to step in, or the CGO gets to step in at that point and go, no, guys, let's play nice. This is all, like, we're developing brand. Let's not
together.
Yeah, let's all join hands. This is fantastic. That's where you're going to land, and you're already doing that. You've done that in a bunch of different spots. Anyone who has VP roles of sales and marketing, that's what you're doing, is you're CGOing that product, and it's just not really titled correctly. So at Benchmade, where are you guys at? What are you doing? Do you have anything super interesting? What's the health? I'd love to know the health of the brand. What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, Benchmade, for those that don't know, Benchmade's a story that you need to listen to, and is one of those really incredible American, like true American stories, where you think about the why. And I'll rewind for a bit. The why is really interesting. I got recruited into the role, and Benchmade was looking for a VP of marketing, and I got a call from a recruiter, and they were like, "Hey, it's this knife company. It's in the Pacific Northwest." And I was an outdoors guy. I didn't know about the brand. I didn't grow up with Benchmades, and so I was like, knife company. I was like, I told the recruiter, I was like, I'm not really interested in just working, for some knife company that's just a bunch of Yahoo hillbillies, making sharp, pointy objects. I was like, I'm a culture guy. I was like, I'm a brand guy. And she's like, you have to speak to John Diasis, the CEO. I said, okay, well, let me have a chat. And it's the best conversation that I've had in a very long time. And John is the son of the founder. His dad and mom founded the business. And the story that he told me and the way that he introduced the why to Benchmade was so compelling. I left the conversation kind of only asking him one question, was like, why does no one know this? Why does no one know this?
Joe. I knew it.
But that question that I left with, a lot of people had also, I think, asked him, like, how he was traveling a lot, validating that his brand had amazing staying power for those that understood it, but didn't necessarily know how to go and meet people. And so I got very intrigued as I met the different groups, how diverse the people were here, the types of personalities. I love manufacturing. So Benchmade is 100% American-made knives. And so our factory, where I'm at today, Oregon City, we have this beautiful campus, state-of-the-art innovation that we have kind of developed over the last 30 plus years, from made on a bench, handcraft, to, really the industry leader in production craftsmanship, and being able to help tell that story to the customer was what I wanted, which was, there was a signal to my past. I loved being from a mining town. I loved the understanding of, like, what is it like to actually be in work? And, we run 6 days a week, 24 hours a day. So you can pop by the office at any point in time and somebody's working on something, building knives, making products. And that helped me understand that there was way more to talk about than just, a product story. And John's vision, as he saw it, was, he's like, there's so many great things about who we are, but we don't know what they are. We need somebody to help form it into, something that we can all follow. So that was why I joined, was to create the brand-led approach, for us to be able to unify the different departments, to ultimately act with the customer in mind, and not only validate that those that know, but that there are many more people who need to know. So how do we introduce ourselves? And, if you've ever spent time in the Pacific Northwest, it's surprisingly like the Midwest. It's a relatively closed group of businesses that are far from many of the economic epicenters of America. It's less culturally diverse than many of those areas. And so understanding how to go and impact those areas is daunting. And they didn't have a strong, marketing leadership team prior. They didn't have a real, intentional way that they wanted to go out and build that business. And they really needed to say, yes, we want it. And then with that, yes, I said, now I'll help you build the process with which everybody gets to be a part of how this brand becomes more impactful to more customers who look different than our core customers, but have those same values. And so that was an exciting way to kind of enter into a total change-oriented moment. So, the team that I inherited when I joined looks very different today than it did in the past. And our ability to move this forward required a commitment from leadership side, but also from the business to go and really go through this change period. And there had been huge impacts. It was COVID. We were remote. I was the first remote hired employee in the history of the company. They said yes to somebody like me. I was living in Minnesota, and I immediately said yes. Boom, I'm moving. But the whole world was shut down. I was trying to get to know what this business was all about. John's dad had passed away just a few months prior, so there was a family transition as well as a cultural transition to the prior ownership, as well as a strong soul of who had really been that foundation of what a Benchmade was built off of. So in partnership with myself and John, we really talked about what was his vision for how he wanted to lead this business, and hearing from him, who's grown up in the business, how he both saw evolution of his father and mother's plans, but also where to lay those elements and groundwork foundationally into the culture was what was missing. So yeah, it has been an exciting ride filled with a lot of change. And oftentimes, for those marketers out there, people talk about team, what it's like to lead teams. And one of the big things I can tell you is I hope you always look at your team and go, do I need to have a big team? Is the goal for me to have lots of people around me working for me? Or is the goal to figure out how to get communication to move through the business, get to the customer, and know how to impact your end customer? And so I took a team and reduced it by a pretty significant percentage, and then began to add on other elements of departments. So end to end, kind of customer relationship lives with me from product ideation to marketing to go to market to brand operations to customer experience and sell-through support. I am now able to view whether or not the thing we ideated is actually loved or hated, and then how we activate on it from a life sharp guarantee. That's one of those really interesting and unique end-to-end commitments that I've never had my arms fully around at any single business, but I do today. And I'm learning so much about how important each individual link in the chain is to communicating value to the customer, because we are a premium product. There are many knives cheaper than a Benchmade, but there are very few that have the type of service, the type of loyalty, as well as the service guarantee that we back it with. So that has presented a lot of interesting data points for me to consider as I learned the business over the last couple of years. And I think today, we've really come into our own as having a strong go-to-market process that is led by the brand saying why we want to go there, asks our culture internally, these 500 amazing employees, to get on board with where we want to go and create these amazing products, to then define, who we're going to be in the marketplace. And we want to shake things up. And so we've been more bold as brand has taken on product here, pushing new, innovative, challenging products into the market because we knew we could communicate it in a way that we hadn't in the past. So we've been able to effectively take more risk while creating more revenue and exciting our customers in a really cool way. So it's been a ton of fun, and we're getting ready to kind of culminate a 3-year plan here at the end of the month, which is a full digital transition of all of our web properties, new website, new communication tools, new content. We've really created a media powerhouse that creates internal content. We don't rely on agencies like we used to. When I joined, we've built that internal team dynamic to be able to go out and find those trusted partners. And I think that's helped us remain authentic into our earlier conversation. Like, I needed to know that while I'm not the number one knife knowledge base in the world, I know some of those people exist here and in our community. So how do we adopt that knowledge and then go create amazing content that inspires both the new customer and the existing loyalist? And that's been helpful for me, to have to learn different things in different industries.
I think it's, to me, you stumbled ass over tea kettle into a super authentic brand. And I know this because I'm a fan of the brand.
For sure.
And when I saw that you popped up there, I was like, oh, that's so awesome. I was psyched for you and I was psyched for them. To me, it looks like, and for people who don't know sort of the cycles of business, but to me, this looks like a family business of one variety or another that's been historically owned over a generation or two, that was built on amazing product. And the only reason that the brand survived is that it was kept in the hands of very few people to, pardon my language, fuck up. Mm-hmm. And I, from what I'm hearing, it kind of sounds like that's reasonably accurate. And that's one way. And there's tons of stories like that out in the world where you've got these amazing small cottage-based businesses that bloom into something that is way bigger than they probably ever expected it to be on inception. Mm-hmm. They stayed the course. They built product based on their strict standards and ethics about what the consumer should be presented as a product, whether it's a sweater, a knife, a muffin, doesn't matter. Literally doesn't matter. But you stay that course on what it is without really a whole bunch of thought to growth, because they're already getting growth beyond what they probably expected. And they're like, wow, we're we thought we were, but we're actually really good at this, and we're great at making really great knives. So you know what, everyone, keep making great knives. And not every company does that. Lots of companies get lost really quickly in the weeds. And thankfully, and I don't know the people personally, they didn't. They kept it tight, kept it moving on, and kept their product to the point where it makes sense. Now, of course, does it make sense? Like Benchmade, in my opinion, is in a perfect position for culinary. There is not that I'm super aware of. When I cook, and I love to cook, I've got a set of old Hinkles that I've kept, which I would happily replace with a couple pieces out of your culinary line for my Japanese knife set. And for people that don't understand, they're fairly different knives, the way they're sharpened, the way they're managed and stuff. They're different products for different things. But for me, there's a really solid spot where you guys could crush it. Not everyone wants a super thin, ultra delicate Japanese blade. They're somewhat impractical, and you have the ability of producing a way more practical, because you don't have to build it the Japanese way necessarily. You can hybrid it and still be super authentic to what you guys are. So I love that. I think that's you guys have so many things that you can do. It's
and I think one of the amazing. It truly is. And I think that's it's a blessing and a curse to own your own manufacturing. Because, so often in my career, it was like, you come up with an idea, somebody goes to China, then you have your shipment and it just shows up. Well, that's different when you build specific purpose-built product, and then you're like, oh, you want to do a specific new purpose-built product. Well, it takes a whole different line or different machines, and you got to figure out how to create so much why, because then there's a huge amount of investment for a long period of time, because we're both the factory and the brand. And looking at those two things is not new it's a totally different way and a totally different relationship to making the product, because being able to point out a product opportunity, understand the financial cost of marketing said thing that comes from the factory, but then look all the way down the line. It was like, okay, what is it going to take for us to invest all of these factory resources towards this product? How long are we talking about? What is the return? And so as product has sat at brand, we've really been able to refine how we're bringing those ideas, market opportunities into a conversation, at the executive and board level that allows brands to articulate both the financial value, the brand value, the customer value of net new launches and future potential market extensions, because we see huge opportunity as well. And your read on Benchmade is spot on. And, the stewardship of who we are today, but also how we go and grow our base. I think that that's where we are the only knife company that really wants to and can go out and grow a massive base based on both what you're identifying, cutlery space where many people cut, but also, understanding how to use, a pocket knife and really bring that mentality of education. And, I love marketing sharp, pointy objects to make sure that people feel comfortable with them, right? And that's a relationship that oftentimes happens in person, right? You get comfortable with something when you get to touch it and feel it, but over the last few years, it's been all virtual and digital. And how do we educate customers, go bring in net new customers? And that's what's been fun about knowing this business a little bit more intimately. As I say, like got in, get about 6 months into the business, I started to understand where really are those things and how are we going to say yes to the opportunity and do it, versus we have many ideas that we think are valuable. The question was, how do we land them and get them done, right? How do we land them and get them funded? And I think that all the way back to our earlier conversation, that is a critical function of a great marketer, is understanding not just how to create the idea, but how to land it effectively to create partnerships cross-functionally, where your finance CFO gets on board, your sales VP gets on board, your CEO gets on board, and all of a sudden you've moved the resource forward and you've moved the brand forward, and then you've adopted those new customers because you knew you could take it to market. And I think that's an often missed opportunity by a lot of marketers, is creating those partnerships, truly understanding the challenges of each individual co-partner.
It's without a doubt the reality of it. If you have a company out there that's exceedingly siloed and you guys rarely get together between sales and marketing and finance, you guys are making a giant error and you're not going to survive past whatever the cycle that you're in now. You might if you're a huge company, but you will fade.
You got to break that down.
You got to break it down. And the reality is that it's so much more organic than what it is. And let's be honest, marketing started at, the very first farmer's market. You got Mike puts up an apple stand. You got Stan who puts up an apple stand. And, their apples are pretty equal. They're great. Then Mike puts up a sign and he says, my apples are, the king buys my apples. And, his apples are like, oh my God, the king eats those apples. And then the next thing you know, Stan's got a sign up and he says, well, the queen loves my apples and she makes the apple pies that everyone loves out of it. So now they're doing this, and then they're now essentially growing brand. And this is 300 years ago, 400 years ago at a castle, right? But it's exactly where it started. And before you know it, well, Mike's put his wife in, and Mike's wife's pretty hot. And so now she is doing it. So now they're using sex to sell apples. And then, well, Stan loads in his two daughters, and well, guess what? Stan's daughters, not too bad to look at. So not only, they're battling back and forth, but they're pulling up all these tools have existed forever. And before you know it, price is the thing. And apples, then once you bring price in, they become a commodity and everything changes, because now you're racing to the bottom. Soon as you cannot do it with any other fabulous branded thing, you end up in the race to the bottom. And the
more you control brand, the more you can control price, and you can continue to push that price because you're creating value, even if it's not, just the simple product value, right? And the standard margins. You can create value based on the intangible thing, which is the branded experience that has tangible assets that validate your purchase. But ultimately, great brands are worth more to people.
1,000,000%. 1,000,000%. And well, that's actually surprisingly, the pharmaceutical world may have broken that with generics and function. There are some weird, there are things that break that down in certain areas. I just spent, I don't know, 2 weeks doing a super in-depth series of podcasts on cannabis because Canada is legalized and I don't get it. Like it's not my world to market. I've never understood it. So I really wanted to understand all the different issues that are going on in there. They're literally having all the same issues that, there's Benchmades in there and there's Swiss Army knives and there's Japanese knives. And then there's all this generic stuff that just sort of ends up at,
how do you break through?
Yeah.
How do you break through? Yeah.
It's a really interesting sphere. And brand is a thing. I talked to her podcast is live. The Queen of Bud, Ashley, she's brilliant. Like she's brilliant. She's was a mom who was struggling, built this premium, beautiful, like Gucci style wheat brand. And she is like bending her way through the restrictions that exist. She's doing it really well. She is a marketing genius and she had no clue. She knew she was good. Yeah. But I was like, there were spots in the podcast where I was just like laughing hysterically. I'm like, you're so smart. That's like unbelievable what you just told me you did. But it exists out there and I think it's amazing. Joe, it's been an absolute pleasure to hear your story. Wherever, I hope that you spend enough time to get Benchmade really fundamentally stable as far as a brand. Not that they weren't stable, but as generations go on, brands sometimes fail. So it'd be amazing to see them with a solid foundation of who they are, what they are, and how to grow Benchmade as a brand, not relying on any specific product, which is really exciting to see that you're there to do it. Where you end up next will be amazing to see, and or if Benchmade is your final destination and you're there for years, they're very lucky people. So thank you for your time. It's super appreciated. We've blasted through one of our longest podcasts, an hour 30. I hope everybody appreciates getting to hear your story because it's amazing. Everyone check out the new Benchmade content and site and brand structure that's going to be coming out in the next few months in 2023. It's going to be cool to see. I'm excited. And by the way, I've got a list. You mentioned the guy at Oakley who was dogging on you, which by the way, I believe, do you look at the person who told you that you're on Shaun's coattails? Do you look at that as, I'm looking at it going like that person, and I've got a list of 5 people that I believe it is that I'll hit you with afterwards. Do you believe they did you the greatest favor? Like, do you look at that conversation as a positive right now?
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. And I looked at it as a positive almost immediately afterwards because it was something that I didn't have a good answer to, right? Had I had a good answer, it was like, no, but I did, right? Like if I had a quick way to be able to validate my own contributions, that felt less emotional. But now that conversation was one of those catalysts similar to Pat Bridges calling me, when I was 15, where boom, a path had to be taken in order to prove that what I thought I could be, I could become. And I love building, right? And so I had to know if I could do it. I had to know if that single statement was true or not true. And I certainly learned a lot about what it takes to build a brand. And for anybody who's a marketer or an entrepreneur, hats off. It's a tough road to try to build something. It's likewise hard to steward something, but it's really different when you're trying to transform and really build something from the ground up. So to those of you that are out there with your ideas, go after it, don't give up, and keep trying to change the world, because damn straight you will. And you'll prove those people wrong, and ultimately you'll prove yourself right, which is pretty fun to be able to kind of look back, at a point in the career and say, oh, this was so fun to talk through. You think about how much I talk about marketing. I very rarely talk about marketing. You know what I mean? So Jamie, thanks so much for, hosting me today, but also for what you're doing. I think it's really cool for everybody to have access to different ways to kind of navigate through the brand landscape.
I love it. Thank you. No better place to end this than now. Enjoy the day, and we'll be talking very soon. Everyone else, thanks for joining in again on Marketeers Clubhouse. We learned a lot today. Appreciate it.